Lincoln. I appreciate you hopping on. Why don't you start us off by introducing who you are and who you serve?
Oh dear. Well, I served myself when I was a kid, and my brothers and sisters were older, so I got friends that were older in classes that were beyond mine, so that I didn't have a lot of social. But then I don't know if that was genetic or situational. Anyway, it grew up that I wouldn't say antisocial, but just very discerning, right? Unsatisfied. So I became a physicist because I wanted to know the answer to things, but they don't know the answer to things. In fact, they don't even like too many questions, which is not surprising. And then I got into computers because that was interesting in the 80s. Actually, I had this idea that I would solve the problem of how to make an accounting system work for any business, and I did, and that was good, except then I had to market it, and that was boring. So, I did that for 20 years and worked for a middle sized market, both as a programmer and as not a very good marketer, and as a consultant, because it was custom software, and met a lot of interesting people. Yeah, interesting people. That's where life happens, in the people. And, but actually, I met for the first time military people, because in my East Coast liberal background and Vietnam War objections, there wasn't a lot of military respect, but I learned to really have a great deal of respect for the military. Well, not the military people. I still object to the military because it takes orders from crazy people. But, the military people who I seem to find myself around as colleagues were dependable. That's like the big thing in the military: be dependable and be accountable. And that was kind of a relief because in business, there's a lot of people trying to squirm out of that, and politics. So that went on for a while, and I should mention that I started mountaineering as a teenager as another attempt to touch reality, and that led me to a lot of places and met a lot of strange people and doing some foolish things, but I survived, and a lot of people don't. So I decided I'd just like to travel without risking my life. So I went to a lot of places, and in the Americas, North and South, Central, Little Asia, a lot of Europe, New Zealand, and sort of took the whole idea of studying to another level. Studying, interacting, spent a lot of time in the Caribbean because my parents had a house there. That's very valuable, I think. Most valuable. And it's interesting that you want to talk about gaming, because gaming is a kind of simulation of reality in many cases.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's what my objection to gaming is, that it doesn't take that next step, which it should. I've been to a couple of game conferences, and you see more of what you would expect. Lots of gamers, lots of gaming. But it was also my first introduction to the publishing industry, which is depressing because it's consumer-oriented, profit-oriented, corporate managed, and not particularly creative. So, there are like 1,200 different versions of Monopoly in the American game market. And that's why Eurogames came on and sort of like blitzed the whole thing. And the European game market still doesn't think much of the American game market. And the American game market is still dominated by toy companies that want to produce another 1,200 versions of Monopoly. So there's this disconnect. When you go to the gaming conventions, you see it. The big companies, which have gates to keep out the small companies, and the small companies, which are doing the innovation. But then they can't be too innovative because they have to survive on a shoestring. And so there's this funny thing that as you personally would like to advance people, there are a lot of forces that want to just milk the cow or maintain security and profitability and comfort. And then you come down to the gamers who are kind of happy-go-lucky, just want to have a good time. It would be nice if we had more, I don't know what you'd call them, activist gamers, which was basically what the Europeans were. They said, enough of this. We've got some ideas, and we've got an audience. And then it slowly kind of trickled into the North American market. I still don't think I design games, and it's funny, it's like an artist. I don't really care playing them. I just like designing them. It's like playing them is 5%, designing them is 95%. If you haven't designed a game, you should try it, because there's a lot. It's like writing. You can't just it doesn't just come out in a finished form. There's a lot of balance and details. You got to understand what you think and what other people think. And that isn't even getting to the graphics, which is a whole art form. So, and I'm not very good at the art form, but I like the strategy mostly. So let's see, travel, and then I finally encountered other cultures and religions and still pursuing reality psychedelics, which are fun if you're careful. And then I got into hypnotherapy, and I never really liked psychology because I thought it was so sort of academic and full of crap. But, the more I talked to people and the more I understood people's problems, the more I was interested in it. So I got a certificate in psychotherapy, and now I'm a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist. And I also, there's still not a great opportunity to discuss this, but a neuropsychologist, which is to say, just as you have physical habits and social habits, you have brain habits, the way you think, and it's hardwired. It's firmware, if you know the distinction between software and firmware. It can be revised. Your thinking can be revised. Your attention, your fixations, your obsessions, your approach to life is, to some extent, programmed into you by your whole life. So when you talk about people and their problems, you kind of have to get to that at some point, because they're like going around in circles, and they come to me for help. And, I have to say, number one, I'm not your friend. I'm not here to be a friend. I'm not a rent-a-friend. And two, I don't know. I don't know your life. I have ideas, but they could be full of shit. And that's okay. I mean, you're coming to me for ideas. Not like, well, solutions would be nice, but I don't have solutions. I just have ideas. So this is where I am, doing this stuff. And just to bring it up to the moment, I wrote a book about my father because I didn't like the other books about my father. He was an architectural photographer who knew all the great architects of the mid-20th century. And it was an interesting period, art and architecture, engineering, the advent of steel and reinforced concrete, and eventually computers. But he, stopped working in the 70s, and computers didn't sort of hit industry until the 90s. But still, a lot of wild things were built, creative ideas, and really odd people. The whole idea of the architect is a kind of meme that comes up in anything from Ayn Rand to The Matrix. And those people, the architects, they're weird. They have a strange job and a strange role, and they're kind of put on a pedestal. And, yeah. So he knew those people, and he worked with them. And most of the books about my father's works are about the aesthetics of the art and the photography and the architecture. And I thought, well, the people are really where it's at. Their relationship to each other and society, and why they came out talking the way they did, and who listened to them. So I wrote this book that had combined the personal with the aesthetic. Because I had also, as a kid, I would work with him. I didn't work with a lot of the architects. He didn't like working with the architects. They were, had their own thing. They got in the way. But, I went to a lot of places I can't remember, some strange cities, Kalamazoo or who knows what. You get on a plane, get off the plane. You're 13 years old. What do you know? And you go through this big empty building because you don't want people when you're taking photographs. And you wander around and you see stuff and you hear stuff. So I wrote the book. But it's going to cost $23,000 to produce because, of course, it's got to be quality, right? Big, good printing. So I was going to go on Kickstarter and do a book, but books don't really make that much. They're not Kickstarter's bread and butter. Games are. And I like games, and I've been making games for, 20, 30 years. So I said, I'll make a game about architecture, and then I'll sell the book. Because a lot of Kickstarter projects do have text or art that goes with the game or whatever it is. So the Kickstarter project, which I hope to start in May. I keep pushing it back, but I think it'll be May. I kind of got to get the rhythm going before you hit the go button. And the game, it's not hard to make a great game because the industry doesn't support a lot of creative stuff. Like I said, it's a conservative industry. It's a toy industry. You don't see a lot of wild and crazy toys. You see mostly derivative toys. Same with games. So it's pretty easy to make a new game, but then it's hard to make it a good game because games are not easy. They have to be balanced and all kinds of technical stuff. And they have to be affordable to produce. And learn. You see like this game, Root. I was like, 150-page manual, and that's not unusual. And I think, oh my God, I've got a 14-year-old son. He doesn't even want to play the game. He just wants to play with the pieces, which is fine, but okay. So I made this game that's pretty easy to learn. It all fits on one player mat, the rules, and it plays like a maze. You're trying to navigate through a maze and earn points as you do. But everybody's got a hand of cards, which keeps modifying the maze, opening passages and closing treasures, and so you play to your advantage and the disadvantage of others while you navigate this maze. That's basically the idea. That's a good idea. And it wasn't too hard to explain. So there's the Kickstarter campaign. The downside of it is that it's a new idea. New ideas are dangerous. Well, I would say risky, not... It depends what you risk. That's how dangerous they are. But I'll have to spend several $1,000s in advertising, and that's the risk. And, I look at these other games and how much they become huge efforts, with several dozen people and art departments and marketing departments and video departments. And I don't even want to do that. It's like,
Right.
that was the story of my software business. I didn't want to get into the marketing. I like the hands-on thing. But that doesn't make it look professional. So now I'm kind of vacillating between optimism and pessimism. And I'm just saying, fuck it. I'll just spend the $2,000 and cross my fingers and pray to God or whatever you do. And try to do some stuff I'm trying to write a blog on gaming, and then I can distribute that to the Facebook groups and other groups and maybe Board Game Geek if they let it, and see if people get it. Or if, and this is the risk, if they're just attracted to the derivative idea. And I guess there's a different market for that, really. There's probably a big market for the derivative idea. The fantasy all sort of came out of the Lord of the Rings, right? And that whole sort of theme of battle and good and evil. And then there are a smaller group who are puzzle-oriented or intellectual, and I'm trying to, I guess, address that group. And I don't really know how big they are, so we'll see. And that's where I am. That brings you up to the present.
Nice. Yeah, sounds like quite the journey. And I know we want to talk about the game a little bit more. What's the name of the game?
Clients versus Architects.
Oh, nice. I like it. And I think you're right. I think I think because the market is so extremely saturated, just really in any medium, really, right? If you look at shows versus movies versus games, both tabletop and video and books, everything there is so much released at any given time that it'll take you over a lifetime to consume it. And so we are pulled in every which direction, and our attention is like the most valuable resource that we have, both as marketers and advertisers. They fight for that, and then we fight to give our attention to the right people, things, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think people, knowing that time is their most valuable resource, they like leaning into things that might be a little bit more comfortable, that they're used to, like you said, a little bit more derivative of something that they've liked before. And I think that's why Star Wars Episode 7, albeit not the best movie, was a decent success, because it was kind of a derivative of Episode 4. 8, 9 we won't really talk about. But I think they played it safe because they wanted that safety net. And so branching out of that, I can see being both a challenge but also very rewarding in its own right,
Yeah, there is the benefit of being derivative is that you can expand on what you know. So you've got the characters and you've got the theme, and you can embellish and deepen that, or you can make a trivial knockoff that fails. But the opportunity is there. And so when you see all these new games that look a lot like the old games, but they say they're different, you can imagine that they might be bringing something new. And since I don't play them, and some of them are expensive. I mean, like I got Gloomhaven as a used game for $100. But again, it's like War and Peace to play that game if you were to try to play the whole thing. And it does take the ideas to another level. So instead of one board with one goal, you now have a dozen boards and a dozen goals. and a larger map, and it expands. If it, I think it fails the sort of literature test. It doesn't have an arc that continues up to the climax before it resolves. Instead, it's a bunch of little climaxes at each board having its own contest.
Yeah.
At least that's what it seems.
Episodic.
And that's not what I'd like to see. And so nobody has. I think there's a lot of tremendous potential in games. It's almost like we've just invented the printing press, and we're still just inventing the novel. And I don't think. And then there's this pressure of commercializing and corporatizing and producing and consuming, which holds back innovation to some degree. And now we've got tariffs. So everybody's a little nervous. What's it going to cost to produce these games? We've been getting Chinese printers to produce them at half the price. So it's a strange kind of river of obstacles. I think a lot could be done. And, another thing that you mentioned, you want to encourage people to be more living their life in reality. And I'd sort of take it in another direction. I'd say, take your game enthusiasm and make games.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was one of the fun things I did to, let's see, I don't know if this is actually true, but it's my memory. When my first marriage kind of dissolved, I was very sad and feeling lonely. So that's when I started. I don't know if when I started. I'm saying this is my story. Like all stories, it's fabricated. That's when I started making games that were social, because then I could get people together, and it worked pretty well. I have a whole, portfolio of games. This is the first one I've tried to commercialize. Sort of. I'm not trying to become a game company. I'm just trying to produce a few hundred. But yeah, there were some fun games. You take some of these ideas about collaborative and competitive and turn order and strategy and randomness, and you can come up with some pretty hilarious combinations. And it worked, and it got me more social, but it didn't really work because it's like going to a bar. It can be social, but maybe it's not really what you wanted. So, but it's definitely better than going into a bar. It's friends of friends, so there's an interesting connection. And you can watch people open up a little more easily. They don't have to drink alcohol, I think. Games are like alcohol. They open you up a bit without the hangover. So, I don't know. Did you ask something? Was that an answer to something?
No, yeah, it was. I definitely resonate that with that, especially with like tabletop games like D&D and other role-playing games like that, because there's actually a good sect of people who use tabletop RPGs as a form of therapy, to where it's a lot easier to do things like open up things when you are playing a character, because there's that kind of degree of separation. And so being in the gaming space, I follow a lot of nerdy therapists, and I'm also part of a nonprofit, Psychology for Geeks, where we try to bring more mental health resources to gamers and geeks. Yeah, and so I'm definitely I'm definitely invested into that world, and so I can definitely see how using a form of escape as a way to level up in your real life can be very powerful. You're right. I play D&D not as regularly as I'd like, but I'm the DM, and so I have friends come over. We play in person, and it's very social. We enjoy, have a good time, catch up. It's the only time that all of us get to come and sit together and enjoy time together, and so I definitely think there's a place for it in real life. I also think that it's like anything where too much of a good thing is a bad thing, and that's kind of where we switch from being the main character to the NPC of our own life. And I like how you were saying, let's use those games to reinforce that main character status, IRL, or in real life.
Yeah. Well, here's an obscene game that I made. I have never played in public, but I think it's an interesting idea. I made a board, kind of a whimsical board. It's a circle. It's actually like a Mobius strip, because it has a rule that you flip to one side when you get to the other end of the board. So it's really just got one side, but it's a hoop made of metal. And then all the pieces have little magnets, so they stick on the hoop, and you can move them around without them falling off, so it doesn't have to be flat. And then I made the pieces naked people, chopped into all sorts of pieces. The head, the breast, the buttocks, the genitals, the arms. And so the pieces of the people move around. And then you have these sexual encounters where different parts meet. And so it's like a joke, really. It's like, can you play this with your grandmother? And I still think it's a funny joke, because I don't think you could play it with your grandmother. Or if you did, it's funny, because you say people's coming out. How do you get people out? That's always been my idea. How do you get people to come out when you give them an invitation to come out in an odd way. So this was sexuality, and so sexuality is so overloaded in our culture, with expectations and needs and like compulsions. So if you turn that into a game, I think it's hilarious. And that was just like an extrapolation of the competition versus collaboration theme. But I think, well, I don't know if anyone really hears me when I say this, but if you could take what bothers you or what excites you and combine them and make a game out of it, what would that do? Would that dilute it, or would it enhance it? That's the problem in designing a game, because you don't want to lose it, you want to enhance it. And it's not so easy when you reduce it to an arm's length object or a pawn or a board. So I did another project which wasn't exactly a game. No, I'll tell you one that was a game. This was a game where you get a group of people together, maybe 30, and then you choose 2 people to present to the group. And you make one person a musician. You give them a little toy music box, which is simple enough that even an idiot can make music from it, because that's how it's programmed, only, major keys and stuff. And you make the other person the speaker. And then you give them cards. The speaker gets cards telling them what to talk about. And it's telling them all kinds of like personal things to talk about, their first encounter, or when they threw up in the car, or when they pooped in their pants, or when they failed at a test, or something good, like when they won something. And then there's a timer, and they have to talk for 3 minutes on this topic while their partner plays music. And then the audience watches this. And I didn't know what would happen, which is probably the most interesting. I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know if it would work at all. But really interesting things happened when I gave this to a group of people. We had a sort of salon that people would get together every month. And what would happen is that people would start to talk about their personal lives in ways that they didn't normally or socially talk about. And the fact that there was music being played, especially bad music, made everyone sort of lighthearted and forgiving, provided a kind of cover for the speaker to reveal themselves almost as if behind a screen, because the music was forming a kind of a screen, distracting people. And it only went on for 3 minutes, and then 3 minutes over. It was pretty amazing. It was like opening up the can of somebody's subconscious and having everybody look in without causing trauma, because it's just the strangest things. People would talk about the strangest things. I thought that was amazing. And I haven't played it since because, well, partly because the musical instrument is defunct and it doesn't work anymore. I'd have to find another one. And because I don't have a group like that, a social group that meets. But, if you go to my website, you'll find a page of games, and it's there. It was called Your Life Set to Music. But my website is so big, you'd be lucky if you find it. You'd have to poke around. So that's what I mean about there's a lot of potential in making games. Here's something that's really important for everybody who's an entrepreneur or a game player or somebody in life, is that you got to be okay with failing. Failing's got to be okay, because it's the only way you do creative stuff. By taking risks.
Absolutely.
And that's how you learn. You don't learn by doing the right thing every time. That's just derivative. Then you write 1,000 versions of Monopoly. You're creative by trying new things that might work and learning how they don't, and you call that a failure, but it's not entirely a failure unless you give up. So that's another thing. Don't give up. And don't let what you think of as a failure stop you, because it's actually a necessary part of growth and change. That's one of my messages. It's like a therapeutic message.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of that. One of my catchphrases is "There's no failure, only feedback," and so that way it allows you to kind of stumble, and as long as you get back up, you're never failing. And that a big part of that, for going back to the NPC main character mindsets, is breaking out of that comfort zone, your circle of comfort, if you will, because that's where growth happens, is outside of that comfort zone. And it's also where you become uncomfortable.
Yeah,
and so it's like, again, if we're playing games like an RPG, a video, a tabletop, You have to defeat monsters and do quests to level up, right? And those are all challenges that you have to be challenged in order to get the experience to level up. And you don't get any experience by staying within your comfort zone, going, in real life. You don't get any experience staying in that zone of comfort. You're just going to be staying the same. And then that's where that NPC mindset comes in, because you have no opportunity for growth and you are not growing. And I think that is kind of where the failure lies, is not actually taking that chance, not going out and embracing discomfort, embracing the suck, embracing imperfection, and allowing yourself to have those stumbling blocks and feedback and stuff like that. That's where true failure lies, is not actually taking action.
There's another area that's fraught and where failure has a potential definition. One of the things that everybody does is project. You project your problems, you project your illusions, and I think it's necessary. It's like painting a picture. If you don't say it or see it, you can't deal with it. So, you could be neurotic and say, "Oh, it's all my fault. I'm fucked up and woe is me." But that's not very healthy. And you could also say, everybody else is the problem, which isn't all that healthy either. So what tends to happen with everybody is that you project, usually onto the people who are close to you. You misunderstand, or basically you understand the way you think things are, but that reflects your misunderstanding of things. And then conflicts arise, and then people get irritated, and sometimes it's destructive. I mean, it is. It's like it can become violent in the extreme. So this is the difficult part of accepting failure, because failure can often be painful. It's not just, let's try it at setting 3 this time instead of setting 2. No, it can actually hurt. Failure can hurt. And the question is hurt good? I mean, there's no real answer to these questions, because sometimes hurt seems to be necessary when it comes to resolving trauma or coming to grips with your illusions. And so some becoming not an NPC, becoming the real player in your life, in your game, in your strategy, in your projection, can have risks. And this is where I think human beings haven't kind of evolved enough. Because it seems like we need some sort of brain organ to tell us risk better. And not just danger, Will Robinson. We need to, why does it take a lifetime to become wise, at which point you could start being a child again and know what risk to take? No, you're a child and you don't know jack shit, and you get in trouble. And a lot of people, as you might know if you're in therapy, have trouble with their parents. I mean, I think a lot of parents aren't ready for being parents. I mean, you look in the animal kingdom and how parents, it's just completely different. It's very circumscribed. The animal mothers are very doting and protective. The animal fathers are absent most of the time. And then there's this flip at some point where the animal mothers throw their kids out of home and tell them to go off on their own. And then you look at human beings and it's like nobody knows what's going on. They're bad parents from the start. They're kids that are dependent. There's abuse. There's trauma and injury. It's I think we're not evolved enough, because as a therapist, you see all this stuff. And I don't know what the average of 2.5 kids per family is like a joke. What's the average mental health? So if people retreat to non-playing characters, I can appreciate it. Maybe they really don't have the kind of help and guidance that they would need to come out because of the territory in which they would come out, or the issues they would bring, or the kind of projections they would put. So if you're going to project, monster versus hero onto real life, I don't know if that's such a good thing to do. That's right. Isn't that like war? So, so you do this simulation in a game. And is that helping? And then you say, well, don't just do it in the game, do it in real life. Well, what does that mean? Go out and burn a cross on somebody's lawn? No, it's there's still some steps that are needed to manage what could be anger, or what could be shame or guilt. And I guess my answer is you kind of have to invent the game. So we're back to designing games. I don't know any game that actually does what you are suggesting, leads a person to express their true self. I mean, the game that I invented did, but that was an accident. I didn't kind of know what I was doing. But more of that would be interesting. That would be a good game to produce. But then I'm not sure it would be producible because corporations wouldn't want to take the risk, at least in North America, maybe in Europe. I don't know. So I don't know. What do you think about this?
I think there's an element in there in like tabletop role playing games where, like I said, therapists are doing it already to where they can embody a character that, or like a character that has either similar trauma to them or a character mirroring themselves. And they can portray things the way they want to in a game that has virtually no consequences for their actions, like real life consequences, right? That's why we like playing video games, and we can take the risk, and if we die, we just respawn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that doesn't translate to real life. Able to, in a tabletop role-playing setting where we can role-play things that we might want to happen in real life, like, approaching your crush at the tavern or, speaking to your boss about potentially getting a promotion. Like, stuff that are very much real-world applications, and learning to potentially level up your charisma in real life through tabletop role-playing games. I think there's definitely something there. And there actually is, this name is escaping me, there actually is a system in place to help people. It's like single player based, but it's primarily for people with autism to really help improve their communication skills through role playing games. And so I think there's definitely a line of truth, and I think people are tapping into that maybe a little bit more than what you're noticing.
What was the? I was thinking about the last night, and I couldn't remember. What was the school age group that got people together to do live action role playing? Wasn't there a main name for that group? They'd take on characters and they'd have sorties and they'd make foam swords and they'd go out and battle in real life. And there was some structure and there was some referees to the whole thing. I'm not hearing about it now, but it seemed to have
It's
been
like LARPing in general, or were you saying there's an actual body of it?
I thought there was an actual body. There was actually schools of it, that sort of gave you the whole package so that you could implement it in your community. Is there stuff like that?
There could be.
I mean, maybe maybe it's like varied now because I haven't kept up with it since my kids are not at that age, and I don't even see it happening. This was when my other kid was 14, but now he's 24, 10 years ago, and now my younger kid is 14, and I don't see it around. But then I'm in Canada, so who knows?
Yeah. LARPing is definitely a thing. I don't know how popular it is compared to in the past, but being invested in this community, I've spoken to a lot of people who do LARP, and it's definitely a workout in itself. But they'll have like campaigns to where one guy I spoke to did a Cosmere campaign, which is Brandon Sanderson's works of the Stormlight Archives, and they would run through battles. And so, I mean, I'm sure there's all sorts of different campaigns, whether they're homebrewed or based off of an IP like the Stormlight or Lord of the Rings or medieval fantasy or realistic fantasy or realistic history. And so there are definitely, LARPing is definitely a thing. How big it is, I don't know. But that one thing I was talking about, I looked it up. It's called Critical Core, and it helps people improve their overall communication skills. And like I said, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it's more geared towards people on the spectrum because they tend to have a little bit more, they struggle a little bit more with communication skills. Yeah. So it helps them with that. And so I think it's a unique tool. I had a client a while back using it, and he really liked it.
I'll look into it. Yeah. I mean, most of my therapy work, to take this sort of in a slightly therapy direction, is one-on-one. Almost all of it. There is like group therapy, and there is like couples therapy, and there is family therapy. But I do mostly one-on-one. And I'm not sure if that's because the need is greater or it's because of my presentation. I think it's because of my presentation. I'm personal and I'm involved. And what I call people to do is reveal themselves, and so maybe a family therapist or a group therapist would be more sort of abstract and, NPC-like in there, or dungeon master type role. But I tend to get in and roll up my sleeves and get my feet wet with the people that I work with. And that might be a different approach. And, thinking of what you're saying about how to get people, I don't know if you want to say out of their shell, but, maybe. I'd use more of the metaphor of out of their skin. To metamorphose into a different shape rather than just expose themselves. There are different ways to do it. I have done some group therapy, virtual group therapy, and get people together in a Zoom call. And I've done some other things, but I'm not the standard kind of guy. But that's okay because things are changing, and I think the virtual connection that's now possible. I mean, I'm totally sold on it. I think it makes much more. Now you really have to come up to the bar. Before you could say, well, I'm not available on Thursday evening. But now it's like, just get on the computer, 30 minutes. You have no excuse except that you don't want to be there. So I'm a real advocate of this virtual technology. The other thing that sort of is an obstacle that we have to solve is the cost. I get quite a few people, maybe half the people who come to me, who've never been to counseling before. Now, these aren't gamers because I'm not pitching to the game market, but they don't know what their time or counseling would be worth, so they're not sure what it should cost. And almost, well, no, I shouldn't say almost, but a majority of the time they undervalue it, which is to say they think I cost too much. So, they think this is the value and this is the price. And they say, oh, that's too much. And sometimes they go and find somebody who charges very little, which are usually new people who don't have experience. But I believe most of the time the problem is that people don't value themselves. They don't see the value of what could be accomplished. And I think that's really important, because if you don't value yourself, you're never going to go beyond what you see as your own value. Well, maybe you will when you get there, but it won't be a goal if you can't see it. And I think that's very important for people to understand. You're only going to achieve as much as you can imagine, and your imagination is going to be the main obstacle to what you can achieve. So if you're going to stick as an NPC, or you're going to stick as a game player, or you're going to stick in the background in the safe place, no risk, no gain sort of thing. And so I talk to people and I entice them and I encourage them and I cheerlead them and then I slap them down, and say, oh, you're full of shit. Or, no, that's mistaken. Or, no, I think you're going in the wrong direction. So it's like, good cop, bad cop. I encourage you to advance, but then I want you to be discerning. And like I say, I'm not your friend. I'm Loki. I'm the trickster. I entice you to, like the Roadrunner. I entice you to run at that brick wall and think that you can go through it, because maybe you can. And if you can't, well, you ought to know it, that you can't. You ought to know where the brick wall really is, because maybe you go around it or have a different approach. But if you don't value yourself, it's hard to, in my case, I won't work with you. If you don't pay me, I don't work with you. I mean, all apologies aside, people don't realize how much effort and I would assume all good counselors put into their clients. It's like, we spend an hour with you online, but we at least spend another hour or two in our minds thinking about you, recording, editing, and not to say billing too. And, we can't do it for less. At least we can't do it well. So this has been a problem. How do you get service to people? You could say that they can't afford it, but I don't really believe that, People can afford whatever they think is really valuable. They'll spend a lot of money on something that they think is, they'll spend money on clothes and stuff because they think it's important. In a sadder way, alcohol and cigarettes and drugs because they think it's important. And I say that's sad because it doesn't really work out most of the time. So here we are back at games. Games are cheap. It's pretty easy to get together. You're talking about therapy. I'm just talking about socializing. But I can see, and I like the idea, that there could be a step beyond the gameplay to growth or healing. So, I guess I ask you this as a question. How do you take that step? Do you simply attract people who are ready for it? Which I'm sure there are some. But how do you go about encouraging more people to see that as a game, as a therapy, not just as a recreation?
Like, how do I get people to increase their self-worth to invest in coaching, or just kind of in general?
I guess so. It's a sort of a general question. You could apply it to gaming, or you could apply it to conversation, or people come to you. Also, you have the same problem. What's your coaching worth? Are they really just solving this small problem? Because rarely it's just the small problem they bring to you.
Yeah. So I guess to answer that, in the coaching sense, a lot of what we do is like behavioral based. And so someone will come up to us and say they need to lose 100 pounds. And then we kind of dive into why they want to lose 100 pounds. What does that mean to them? Why is 100 pounds the magic number? And then kind of like diving into their deeper why, and then using that information and kind of craft a customized program for them. That's kind of like the broad strokes of it. But there are a lot of people that don't value themselves to invest in themselves. They'd rather spend, $5,000 to build a PC when that's more than any of my coaching programs. And so because they can escape using that PC. And what we do to help just overall improve self-worth with people who aren't clients, just maybe prospects or followers, is just try to nurture them in the content, just to, empower them, say, hey, this is, you're worth investing just your time. Like, invest time in the real world, like invest your time in the real world, in your body, into yourself. And just showing them that. And then also stuff like this, where we celebrate victories of other people's successes and stuff like that, other gamers. And I try to show through kind of example that, hey, this is possible because of X, Y, and Z. And then look at, these people here, they've seen it, they've done it. And so clearly what you can do is possible. And so trying to give them like small drips of confidence boosts till they're ready to say, you know what, you're right. This is, something that it's worth investing in. And then we go through our normal nurture process, hop on a couple of calls, and we have a pretty thorough vetting process just to make sure that people who come through the doors and ultimately sign up are a good fit, where we can actually help them and not just take their money and run, which is an unfortunate truth for some coaching programs.
Although I have to add, some people, I take their money and then they run. And I have to say that's okay. And then but it does hurt, in a sense, that I think that, did I do the right thing? Are they correct in that this wasn't for them? I wonder and I don't get any answers because no one comes back to tell me. But I try to do what you're saying. It's funny. I'm not their friend. I'm not your friend if you're a client. But I try to be friendly. It's like Loki. He's got a smile, but then he does his weird stuff. And to me, that's the vetting process. You have to be okay with being challenged and realize that it's not about making friends and getting approval. I'm a great advocate of and supporter of my clients, even the ones who piss me off. I think, all right, we launched you. And I'd say that's probably the biggest part of my vetting process is if you're not going to value yourself, then we're probably going to hit a glass ceiling of some kind. And I do get some people who are very self-destructive, and they don't come back because I'm too expensive, or I don't know what, but, whatever. They're at the glass ceiling. And so I do try to be encouraging and friendly and supportive, and that's the word's not enlightening, but enlivening. And if they respond, then I think, good, we can move. There is a path forward. I don't know where it ends. We would dig things up. We'll see. And it's not for me to say where it should end, although I have high goals. So, I should mention Clients versus Architects is the name of my game. clientsversusarchitects.com is the webpage.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's a good note. Any other contact information? I'll put it all in the description, but how is the best place to get a hold of you, follow you? Give me all that deets.
Well, the Clients versus Architects page, clientsversusarchitects.com, is a landing page to collect emails for the Kickstarter. It's the Kickstarter, incubator. If you want the whole package of the games and the therapy and the coaching and the neuropsychology, you could go to mindstrengthbalance.com and get lost on that website, which is my therapy website. mindstrengthbalance.com. But mostly I want you to join the Kickstarter campaign. I shouldn't say that, but that is, today's goal. And so if you sign up on that clientsversusarchitects.com site, I'll explain the backstory and the book and the game, and then you get, special offers and so forth and so on. And the Kickstarter campaign is pretty well organized. Reward tiers that range from $20 to $250. They're reasonable. And you didn't ask, but you probably will. What do I want to leave people with? And it's the kind of refrain is like, you're worth working on. Not just you're worth working on. I think people are obliged. This is my spiritual side. I think people are spiritually obliged to improve their lineage, which indirectly improves the world. And I think it's more important to work on your lineage than the world, because the world is just too chaotic and complicated and never goes in a straight line. But your lineage, you know what you like, and you know what was healthy, and or at least you think what becoming better and stronger mean. And it's really important that you do that. And nobody else is going to do it.
Right. Yeah, what was that? Be the change you want to see in the world?
Yeah. Was that Gandhi or something? Or
Yeah,
MLK or something? I don't know.
I think it was Gandhi. I think.
Yeah.
Well, Lincoln, that's right on time. It was a great chat, definitely inspiring. And like I said, I'll have everything in the description for people to check out your websites, and then the Kickstarter. But other than that, I appreciate you having on, and you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks, Jordan. You too.
All right, thanks, bud.